Hello and welcome to AFAL Podcasts, the home of objective, up-to-date and independent reporting on Turkey. Don't forget to follow our reports through social media, on afalnews.com or through our mobile app. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to podcast series of Ahval News Online. This is Hot Pursuit and I'm Yavuz Baydar. Today we will speak about a new development in Washington, D.C., which regards a new sort of tension between Ankara and Washington, D.C., between Trump administration and Erdogan administration. 2 days ago, the U.S. Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, in short, OFAC, designated 6 individuals and a money exchange company with offices in Turkey for their roles in a key Islamic State financial network. These individuals are part of the Ravi network, whose operations in Turkey and Iraq are led by the Belgium-based Iraqi national, Mushtaq Talib Zugair al-Rabi. Details are many, and the important part is that for some years now, Turkey has been seen as vague in its treatment of such activities related with the ISIS and jihadist movements in the Middle East. And we will discuss about this and try to understand what's at stake and what the prospects are regarding the Turkish-American relations. And I'm together with executive editor of Ahval News Online English, İlhan Tanır. İlhan, welcome.
Hello.
And our guest is Ms. Merve Tahiroglu, research assistant with the Foundation of Defense of Democracies. Merve, welcome.
Welcome, thank you.
Please give us the details about this development.
So the important thing on Tuesday's decision with OFAC is that it discusses this Rawi network, as you mentioned brilliantly in your intro. This is an Iraqi network that also has operations in Belgium, Iraq, and Turkey. And what we see with this network, which really has been doing this sanctions evasion and money laundering business for decades, it originally came to the public view, evading sanction, helping Iraqi President Saddam Hussein evade sanctions against himself back in the day. And apparently this network has been a key ISIS financement organization for the past few years. What we see in OFAC's decision and investigation is that they operated from this money exchange business that they set up in a northern Turkish province of Samsun, which is itself very interesting. This is by no means the first time either a Turkish person or entity or a foreign person or entity operating from Turkey has been designated by the U.S. Treasury for the financement of ISIS. I can personally count at least 11 such figures who are operating from within Turkey that have been designated for evading sanctions against groups like ISIS or other jihadist groups that are related to Al-Qaeda or Islamic Jihad and so on. But this one is, I think, particularly important because it shows that well into 2018, so until about last fall, this particular network continued using hawala methods and other methods to move money into this Islamic State's so-called provincial leaders in Iraq and Syria. And this comes, 2 years after Turkey officially changed its position towards ISIS and when it took a more aggressive approach towards ISIS by launching its Euphrates Shield operation in Syria and so on. So it shows us that even though Turkey officially changed its position and took a tougher stance on ISIS in 2016, well into last fall at least, ISIS networks have been using Turkey to help finance the group.
İlhan?
Hello, Merve. I want to say that the FTD and your work is very important for those who are very interested in this illicit financing in Middle East, and not many people are working on it. My question is that you say in your latest piece on this designation that Ankara's failure to crack down on jihadist networks in Turkey is a matter of choice. And we also see some news headlines time to time coming out from Turkey saying that Turkey is arresting this many people, member of ISIS or these jihadi networks. How do we understand these two uh, uh, different news? Does Turkey doing anything about the jihadi networks, or they just appear doing something?
So we started seeing a growing number of news reports, especially after 2015, that Turkey was detaining all sorts of suspects of involvement in the Islamic State. We see, up to 1,500 or 2,000 people that the Turkish state has apprehended since then. But the problem is that if we look at the detentions themselves and compare them to the actual convictions and the actual arrests that result out of those detentions, the actual number is very small compared to the numbers that the Turkish Interior Ministry or the Justice Ministry boasts, about going after ISIS. This is a big problem, especially given the political climate in Turkey right now. Since the failed coup attempts in July 2016, Turkey went off on this massive purge of dissidents, and it arrested, it detained about 150,000 people whose main I guess sin is just to be in opposition to the Turkish government. And when we look at the Turkish courts and the police and authorities' treatment of Turkey's dissidents, of which I believe around something like 50,000 are still arrested in prison.
According to Human Rights Watch, it's there about 49,000, out of which nearly 10,000 are related with the PKK, and Gülenists are 34,000, and the jihadist-linked inmates are about 1,100, roughly speaking.
Yes, I mean, looking at these numbers, we can see that this is the Turkey's failure to crack down on these jihadist networks is a matter of political will. There is simply no political will. The political will is about going after dissidents and not after people who actually threaten Turkey's national security, especially given that we know when we look at these arrests that are of people, Turkish people connected to the Gülen organization or the PKK. Oftentimes we see that these cases, the evidence presented in these cases are very thin, and that's the main problem when we look at the way Turkey treats these dissidents and how it jails them, and then the dwindling number of jihadists, especially compared to all sorts of reporting out there about just how wide these ISIS and jihadist networks are, widely entrenched they are in Turkey. It shows us that Turkey is not actually interested in pursuing these people.
Are there any indications or signs that for example, such designations as we speak about, the one at the dated for April 16, are seen as serious signals or warnings from United States? Are they perceived? Are they understood in Ankara or not?
Well, we have no reason to believe that they are understood in Ankara, especially given that this particular news has been barely covered by Turkish newspapers, which is 90% owned by Erdogan or his family or his business cronies. And so when we look at this, I don't believe Ankara is taking the message from this that it should. And this is, in fact, sending a message to Ankara, because usually when OFAC has these kinds of statements, it lists in detail the kinds of agencies and governments that have cooperated in these investigations. And we see in this particular statement, for example, the involvement of the Iraqi government in helping the United States uncover the details of this Rawi network, we see nothing about Turkey. So it also goes to show that Turkey hasn't really cooperated with US authorities in uncovering this network. That is, I think, an important message that the US Treasury is trying to give Ankara, although it is likely going to fall on deaf ears.
Let me follow up with another question. We see Turkey a kind of being a jurisdiction for illicit finance, whether Venezuela, whether Iran, whether ISIS members, and some Hamas financing. How can you explain that Turkey can be linked to this illicit and sanction subject activities, whether with Maduro regime or other regimes?
Yes, absolutely. This designation should really be seen as, along with all the other designations that the US currently has in place of people involving Turkey, either Turkish people or people using Turkey. Turkey is becoming a major jurisdiction of concern for illicit finance. And we see this not just with the terrorism finance into these jihadist groups, but as you said, also Turkey has become a jurisdiction to evade US sanctions against regimes like Iran and Venezuela. And when we look at Turkey's attitude, or the Turkish government's attitude towards all of these sanctions, it's simply one of nonchalance. They're not taking, Turkey is not taking these sanctions seriously. Just this week, we had President Erdogan's son-in-law come into the White House and practically ask President Trump to issue a waiver to Turkey for buying the Russian S-400 missile defense system, which actually could trigger sanctions against Turkey, because the United States has legislation in place sanctioning governments or entities dealing with the Russian defense sector. So there is an actual law about this, and that is what Turkey's purchase of the S-400s is going to trigger. But Turkey is not taking it seriously and asking Trump personally for a waiver, in the same way that it is, has been asking the administration for waivers on its sanctions on Iran. It also defies, as Washington continues to debate more and more sanctions on the Venezuelan regime, especially with regards to the gold trade that's been happening. Turkey again continues to defend Maduro and explicitly say that it will continue its trade relationship, continue boosting, in fact, its trade relationship with Venezuela. All of these together shows us that Turkey is not really a partner that is cooperating with the United States or its NATO partners against these rogue regimes or jihadist groups and basically in terrorism finance matters.
Okay, Ilhan, if you have no more questions, we can wrap it up.
I would add whether Merve has any news on the Halkbank and Zarrab case, and why we are not hearing anything about this impending fine, which was reportedly supposed to come maybe 6 months ago.
Yes, Washington is still expecting that fine, although, as you said, we haven't seen anything about it in months. There are some reports indicating that there are backdoor negotiations potentially between Halkbank and the US Treasury on how to approach this. Of course, this is a very bad time for Turkey given the economic crisis that's unfolding, which is pretty unprecedented in Turkish history. So given all of these, if the US in fact issues this fine against Halkbank, it could really be detrimental for Turkey's economy. So I think there's a bit of a space for negotiation there. But at the end of the day, what the Halkbank trial in New York showed us was that clear evidence with some support by the Turkish government in helping these networks evade sanctions. And what that means is that this Turkey's problem with illicit finance is not going to go away. There doesn't seem to be any acknowledgement by the parts of the Turkish government to stop these practices. In fact, we're seeing more robust language coming out of Ankara, especially with regards to Venezuela. So this is, this will continue to undermine the bilateral relationship between Turkey and the United States, but also between Turkey and NATO.
Very interesting, thrilling, in fact, because it's happening between two historic allies whose common history goes back 7 decades. Merve Tahiroglu is a research analyst at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, in short, FDD. Thank you, Ms. Merve Tahiroglu, for this enlightenment, for this explanation of this thrilling subject. And thank you, İlhan Taner, Executive Editor with Ahval News Online.
Thank you.